I'm Chris Avina with American Outdoor News, and today we have some very special guests, Dave Boon Benton and Sarah Adams, both co-authors of Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Now, Dave, I know you were at the annex that night, and Sarah, you were in Benghazi as well. You're basically the person behind the curtain.
Yes, correct. The Wizard of Oz, maybe.
Yeah, you're a counterterrorism targeter,
Correct.
or at that time you were.
Yeah, now I'm old and they're all much better than me now, these new young people.
Yeah. So what was your position prior to that night?
Sure. So basically what I did is I was the person who helped find targets in the city. So usually it's to capture or detain. We weren't doing much of that in Benghazi. So a lot was looking for individuals we could recruit, looking for information we could collect that had been a gap. You know, as a lot of people don't realize, when Gaddafi was in power, you know, that country was a black hole to us. So now, you know, we had a lot of opportunity to collect information we were never able to collect before. And we actually had to kind of start from ground zero and get the ball rolling on all the different types of intelligence collection in the country at the time.
Now, did the CIA or the NSA or any of the three-letter agencies, did they have any intel indicating what was building up to that night?
So yes, there was intelligence that the area was becoming more unstable and there were increasing attacks, but there was no direct intelligence of a direct threat on the consulate or the annex on that day. So the environment was high threat, and it continued to get worse, but there was nothing specific that said, hey, this is going to happen at this time.
So under normal circumstances, you've done security all around the world. In a normal circumstance, wouldn't you build up security?
So you have to understand that there's different agencies involved in this. As far as the annex goes, security was pretty tight. It was the consulate under the State Department who had a lapse in security.
And that's where everything took place.
No, that's where it started, at the consulate, but it ended at the annex.
Okay. All right. Well, so you both collaborated on this book that you've been working on since 2015, doing your own internal investigation. How are you able to put this out?
Well, the good part is we knew it could get a little dicey. So we did the whole investigation unclassified. So basically every name, every photo, every piece of information we have, we collected it ourselves using unclassified means. So that means we didn't go to foreign governments and ask, we didn't go to foreign spies we used to know, we didn't go to the US government and ask for any info or take any information from our jobs there. So it's information we could just hand off to you tomorrow now, because we made sure we collected it in that manner.
The interesting thing about that, though, is a lot of this information, even though it's open source, to our knowledge, the government doesn't have a lot of it.
So why is the DOJ blocking the release of any new information on Benghazi? I mean, isn't this something that every American should know or be informed about?
Absolutely, every American should know. But right now, it's actually the Department of Defense who needs to review it. So it's been reviewed by the agency and they approved it. So now we're just waiting on the Department of Defense to have their chop at it. And they're taking a long time.
Well, you've done a lot of research. It's taken a lot of years to put this together. What is the meat and potatoes of this book that you want people to know?
Yeah, I mean, the meat and potatoes is it was an Al-Qaeda directed attack. It was pre-planned. There was over 50 historic Al-Qaeda members who participated in the attack. We have over 100 of the attackers actually identified in the book. So we just want to make it clear it was an Al-Qaeda attack. We didn't go after the attackers. As a result, they went on to commit attacks, kill thousands more people, because we didn't act against them, because we didn't want to be honest with the public and say it was an Al-Qaeda attack.
Well, call me crazy, but isn't the assassination of an American ambassador a declaration of war?
You would think there'd be, very high consequences for something like that, but nothing happened.
Yeah, and our attackers actually viewed it the way you're saying. They fled. A lot of them fled to Syria, which is crazy, right? They thought Syria was safer than Benghazi because they thought we would come in and rain hell on them, right? As the US usually does in retaliation. So that is what everybody expected. We expected it.
Well, we had reinforcements in what, Italy?
So we did have assets that were in that region, but none of those assets were prepared. None of those assets were given official orders to actually go to Benghazi. The only orders that were given were for those assets to go to Tripoli, but never to Benghazi.
So why was there hesitation to send reinforcements? I know you've called numerous times for reinforcements.
Yeah, I think part of it, there's a couple of reasons. Part of it, the biggest reason is there is an intelligence failure. So in the middle of the night, there was a Facebook post that said that there was going to be a threat against the US embassy that's in Tripoli, basically 400 miles away. They shifted all their focus to what now is an empty building in Tripoli because those people had moved to the CIA building there. And that's all they cared about is protecting an empty embassy, even though there are ongoing attacks in Benghazi. A second issue, though, is the CIA did downplay the attacks going on at its annex, not the CIA guys fighting, the CIA staff. And so they weren't sharing that these attacks were ongoing and the intensity of the attacks, with the community.
All right. So who was responsible for the attacks? I know you know exactly who planned it, who was the mastermind, governments involved. Who are we talking about here?
So ultimately it was Al-Qaeda, but there's a lot of inner workings and there's a lot of other groups behind the scenes, but ultimately it was Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, so the attack was directed by the leader of Al-Qaeda, who now, as of July is deceased. So Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, he planned it, used a lot of his historic networks. Like Boon is saying, we're saying Al-Qaeda, but there's a lot of guys who were the Egyptian Islamic Jihad. That was the group Zawahiri led before Al-Qaeda, so very long time ago. So yeah, there are terrorists from the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, a lot of terrorists who were involved. Either they fought in Iraq or their brothers or fathers died in Iraq fighting US forces. So very long historic terrorist networks, that all came together for this attack.
So out of everybody that was involved, how many are in prison? How many have been dispatched? And how many are still at large?
Yeah, we actually haven't really counted numbers. We probably should. So we'd say maybe about half of them are off the streets. So a lot of them were killed by a general in Libya, General Khalifa Haftar. He's not the US ally. He's the opposition to the Libyan government. Some are in prison, some are in his prison. Those ones we don't really worry about, but there's some in the custody of the government of Libya. They've released a lot of Al-Qaeda terrorists, so we're concerned that they won't stay in custody. And then there's a large number at large. Some left Libya and they're living in Turkey, but others are fighting in Tripoli right now for the government of Libya. So basically we're supporting that government and they're funding the terrorists that attacked us. So 10 years later, we still have a failed policy in Libya.
Wow. Now, I know Hillary's famous excuse for the anti-Islamic video. What do you say about that? I mean, outright lies.
So that's very confusing, and we're not sure why they chose to go with that narrative, because they knew as soon as it started that it had nothing to do with the video and it was definitely a terrorist attack. So we're not sure why after the fact that administration chose to put that spin on it. It doesn't make sense. And that's the thing that we always scratch our head about Benghazi. It was never a conspiracy until they made it a conspiracy.
Well, I went to college, but I wouldn't call myself a Rhodes Scholar. The fact that it happened on September 11th, on the anniversary, I mean, it's not rocket scientists. You can't tell that it was a planned attack.
Exactly. We think, it was the narrative that, they were worried it would get out that Al-Qaeda planned it. And remember, the narrative at the time was Al-Qaeda's on the run. We beat Al-Qaeda. You don't have to worry about Al-Qaeda anymore. So you can't have Al-Qaeda killing an ambassador a couple months before the election. It's going to look like a failed and a weak policy.
Well, even the manner. I mean, they humiliated the poor man before they assassinated him. I think it's disgraceful how they represented everything.
So that's actually not factual. It's a rumor that's been going around, and we're not sure where it started to spread. So his body was actually never desecrated. And actually, when he was found several hours later after the attack, and he was found by neighborhood residents who actually supported him. So we actually inspected the body when we took custody of it, and he was treated very respectfully.
Well, that's, I guess that's something good to hear, but now, is there any connection between what went on there and Hillary's email server? I mean, was there any type of compromise?
So that's one of those mysteries. Again, we're not sure why the administration chose to take the route that they did, because there was really no conspiracy in Benghazi. There were things that were done correctly. There were things that were done wrong. There were a lot of things that needed to be fixed, but there was nothing shady going on over there. No weapons were being transported to Syria, nothing weird like that. So we're not sure why the administration acted the way they did.
Yeah, there's nothing in Hillary's emails that would have caused or affected the attacks in any way. Obviously, there might be some interesting emails of her turning down security. She was actually planning to come to Benghazi in October. I would have loved to seen her emails planning that trip. So there is interesting stuff in her emails. The attackers really don't give a damn about Hillary Clinton, right? They came in to kidnap the ambassador, to do a prisoner swap. Obviously a prisoner swap with our president. So Hillary, I don't even think was a factor to the attackers. Like I said, the interesting part is if they would have waited a month, Hillary Clinton was there. They didn't. So yeah, we just don't see the Hillary take at all. And we really just kind of would like her out of the picture, because she's the one that's kind of stopped us from going after the attackers, because she had so much control over the narrative for all these years.
So, in your book, what do you want us to know?
So we really want you to know who was behind it, their backgrounds, where they came from, why they were allowed to do what they're doing currently, because a lot of them are still free, continuing to terrorize people. They also were involved in other well-known, highly publicized terrorist incidents after Benghazi, because we failed to actually go after them and bring them to justice. The Inaminas attack is another one. Some of the attacks in London, the attacks in Paris, France, all these had a tie to the attackers in Benghazi. So we really want the audience to know who the enemy truly was. And then we want either our government or a foreign government to take action against the terrorists who are either in custody so they can be extradited to the United States and tried, or we want the ones who are at large to be rounded up and dealt with.
And that's why we're putting the book out. So I've been briefing foreign partners. I've briefed over 25 foreign governments just in the last couple of weeks. So we're getting this information to people who can take action. The problem is in the United States, there really isn't much interest among our citizens in going after the attackers. So it allows the government not to do it. So the point of us putting the book out and showing everybody, here is our enemy, is so people go to their congresspersons, they say, hey, we want justice. We want you to capture these people, or we want you to transfer the ones in custody who are going to get released. Like, we want real justice for the people in Benghazi. And that's what we're hoping the public does for us.
Now, Dave, you were there that night. You were on the roof. I mean, for an average person, had to be terrifying. Do you feel betrayed by your government?
I feel let down. I've spent a lot of time serving my government since I was 18 years old. So the expectations aren't too high, but at the same time, I did feel let down. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the biggest letdown, if I'm going to speak for both of us, is the fact that, sure, politicians do politicking. We get it, right? They play their games. the issue we have is, we're from the intelligence community and we expect people to leave politics aside, if you work in intelligence. And the fact that the FBI, made a scapegoat as the mastermind and didn't actually tell the public who the real mastermind is. So they sent troops, our troops in to capture a guy who wasn't the mastermind. So they led on the troops. They held a trial. He's in prison. They're about to retry him to give him more years, just to keep playing the game instead of being like, hey, we lied. He's not the mastermind. And I think that's where we feel betrayed, because that's the people who are supposed to do their jobs correctly.
They picked a scapegoat. They said, this is your guy. And meanwhile, the other side is just laughing at us.
Yep. Yeah, actually, the terrorists call him the scapegoat. That's why we use that term. That's what he's called in Libya.
Wow. Wow. All right. Well, what's next? I mean, are you looking to reopen the Benghazi investigation and bring these people to justice?
So as far as we go, we never closed it. So we're still conducting an active investigation, and we treat Benghazi kind of like a cold case. So we'll continue to investigate. As far as the government goes, yes, we want them to actually look into some of the evidence we have, change their narrative, and actually go after the people who are really responsible.
Yeah, and another issue that's really important is, the U.S. is going to go back into Libya. They're going to have a diplomatic presence there, and they never went after these attackers. A lot of them are free, and guess what they're going to do? They're going to go back and target our diplomats. So we also want to keep our future diplomats safe, the diplomats who are allied with us. A lot of people don't know, but just 2 years after the Benghazi attacks, our same attackers kidnapped the Jordanian ambassador. So like Boon said, they keep doing these things. Actually just less than 2 weeks before the Benghazi attacks, they executed basically a consulate general. So it's, how there's an ambassador. So it's the next step down in charge of a consulate for Algeria. They executed him. So this is a problem for the whole region, these terrorists, because they haven't been tracked and located. We've spent a lot of time making sure they haven't gotten into the US. Thankfully, someone's been doing it, but no one has actually paid attention to that. They could have been in the US if Boon and I hadn't been all over it. So we do worry too about their freedom of movement. They're not watch listed. They're in no most wanted list. They can go anywhere they want in Europe. It's very concerning.
Well, with the way our border is today, I mean, we've had over 2 million people come across our border in the past year and a half. How do we know that, terrorists are not coming across our border? How do we know they're not here right now?
Yeah, and really, like, our terrorists can travel legally. They can get a visa and come in because they're not on a watch list. The government hasn't told you that they were Benghazi attackers. So that's what we want to do. We want to get our government to watch list them. We want to get foreign governments to watch list them, like Interpol. We want to talk to Middle Eastern governments and get them to watch list them. So yeah, we want to stop their freedom of movement and travel. So at least if they did try to go over the border, right, we made that harder for them. And that's the key.
So where is the biggest concentration right now as far as terrorist activity?
Tripoli. There's actually a refugee camp, according to the press, called Tajori. Oh, yeah. It's outside of Tripoli. That's where they're all based. And the really interesting thing is, remember when I talked about the Jordanian ambassador, the main Al-Qaeda in Iraq terrorist they got released for him leads our terrorists at that camp. So we know who the leader of our terrorists are. They're fighting for the government of Libya. They get money from the government of Libya. They get money from the government of Turkey. Guess where our money goes? To them. It's a huge problem. That's one thing we're having trouble going after them, right? Because our government is allied with the people who are supporting the terrorists that attacked us. It's insanity.
Now, we pulled out of Afghanistan and we basically left ISIS fully equipped with Blackhawks, ARs, armored vehicles. How much harder does that make our attempt to stabilize the Middle East?
It makes it extremely difficult. As far as Afghanistan goes, obviously we had issues where we supported the Mujahideen back in the 70s and the 80s against the Russians. And then we kind of left and we allowed it to turn into the problem that we had to go back and deal with during the first 9/11. Then we occupied Afghanistan. Instead of supporting that government and making it to where they could stand on their own, we abandoned them. And now we're creating another incident to where it's like we're back in the 70s and 80s again, and we're going to have to deal with the Taliban in Afghanistan again. It's going to be another breeding ground or a safe haven for terrorists, not only homegrown terrorists, or not homegrown, but terrorists that are local to Afghanistan, but also internationally.
Yeah, and what's really important to note too is during that time in Afghanistan, we enabled a corrupt government, right? Their government siphoned our money off of their people, their armed forces, right? They weren't paying their soldiers. Why do you think they didn't fight? They're like, what's our government worth fighting for? We enabled that. We're doing the same in Tripoli. We're supporting a government that, funds the terrorists. And so the population in Tripoli does not, in all of Libya, has a very negative view of the US, right? Because they're like, they came in here, acted like they wanted to give us some democracy and freedom, and then they're backing the terrorists. Like, what the hell? And that's the problem now. We're building all these negative relationships overseas. So what do you think that's going to turn into, right? That's going to invigorate terrorists against us. And so that's a huge concern, just how we're handling these foreign relationships as well.
Wow. Well, hopefully it can get better from here, but
Nope.
all right. So when does your book come out?
Good question. It was supposed to be out September 6th. Obviously that didn't happen. So we're waiting, hopefully, and I know hope's not really a plan, but we're hoping that it will be released sometime this month. But we really don't know at this point because of DOD.
What kind of hurdles did you have to overcome? I mean, I'm sure you had to have the CIA go over your manuscript with each draft.
So the agency was actually fairly quick. It can take up to a year, and they were fairly quick. And that's why we don't understand why it's taken DOD so long, because DOD is not even really in the book.
Yeah, it's very confusing because the agency also made very limited edits. Even a few things we pushed back on, they allowed. So we had zero issues with the CIA. And like Boon's saying, it seems like, why would the DOD, who has less classified information than the CIA, have such an issue with it? So we do have concerns it's being held up, unfortunately.
So this should be a pretty revealing inside look.
Absolutely.
Well, I, for one, can't wait to get my hands on one.
Us too.
Well, I definitely want to appreciate your time for coming on today. I wish you luck with the new book, and please get me out a copy because I'll help you get it out there.
Yeah, we're
Absolutely.
happy to.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. You have a good one.
All right.